everyone, so today we're going to be talking about the cell. A key thing to remember about the cell is that it's the basic unit of life. That means anything that is considered living has to be composed of cells. Now, this is really important to remember because there's actually 5 characteristics of life. And wouldn't you know, being made up of at least one cell is one of the key characteristics. So the characteristics of life, we have 5, just like said before. The first one, all living things are made up of at least one cell. So this is a good thing because bacteria usually are made up of one cell, and it's considered a living thing. So if you think of things like bacteria and algae, which are very, very simple organisms compared to humans, which are made up of billions of cells, well, they're still alive. So all things made up of at least one cell, extremely important. Living things use energy. So again, if we're looking at humans and let's say dogs and cats, they all eat food and we get energy from our food. Same thing with plants. They don't eat food, they make their own food by photosynthesis. But they're doing all these things to use up energy. The third thing, living things grow and repair. Well, a good example is looking at a baby and looking at yourself. You needed to grow, so you needed to build more cells, and you needed to fix yourself. If living things couldn't repair, then living organisms would die from a paperclip because it wouldn't never been able to get fixed. So all living things do this. Living things respond to their environment. Now, this means that living things respond to what's happening inside their bodies and outside of their bodies. Again, humans. If you go outside and it's snowing, you're going to put on a jacket. That's a response to your environment. It's cold outside. You need to make sure that you stay nice and warm, so you put on a jacket. Same thing is, it's noon and your stomach is growling. That means you require food to use energy. So that's, again, responding to environment. But this time it's inside of your body, not outside. And the last thing, living things reproduce. So you take any organism, if you take the male and the female of the species, these two, they mate and they produce offsprings. If this didn't happen, you wouldn't have the survival of the species. So what we're really going to be focusing on today is our concept of the cell. So we're going to be looking more in depth in animal cells. Now, animal cells, these are cells that are in any species that is part of the animal kingdom. We're actually going to be looking at a generic animal cell. So this is not specific to any specific cell type, and it's not specific to any organism in the animal kingdom. But if you're looking at different cell types, you'll notice that there's going to be specific differences. But again, we're going to just be looking at nondescript general animal cell. So this is a picture of a nondescript animal cell, and this is actually drawn by Mr. Kukkonen, who's a fantastic artist. So what we have right here is, you'll notice some key parts. The first one that actually comes to mind is the nucleus. So the nucleus is like the brain of the cell. It controls the cell functions. Inside the nucleus, there's something called DNA, which basically is all the information the organism needs to know how to make itself, reproduce itself, and it's basically the how to making the organism. So that's actually stored in the nucleus. The second part of the animal cell that we're going to be looking at is the mitochondria. So it's right here where the arrow is pointing to, and that's where the cell makes energy. So all living organisms need energy to function, and normally we get that energy in 2 ways. Either one, the organism makes it, or 2, the organism gets it from food. Now, in animals, it's the second option. The organism gets it from food. The only species that we're going to be talking about today that actually makes their own food is plants. So the first one only happens in plants. And anyways, what happens is that the mitochondria, it is the specific place in the cell where it takes the nutrients from what we eat and it converts it into energy. So no mitochondria, the cell's not going to be working properly. Well, actually, to be more specific, if any of these organelles, so the parts of the cells that we're going to be looking at, are missing, the cell is not going to be working properly. The next organelle that we're looking at is the vacuole, so that's where cells store things. And when I'm talking about things, it could be proteins, enzymes, hormones. So pretty much anything that the cell needs, the cell stores it in the vacuole. Now we're looking at the endoplasmic reticulum. So that's the part of the cell where the cell makes and packs proteins, because for the organism to function properly, it needs to have proteins. Now, cells will make these proteins and pack them because proteins have to be shaped in such a way that they can work. Sometimes these proteins are for the cell, and sometimes these proteins are sent out of the cell. But the key point is that the endoplasmic reticulum is where these proteins are made. Now, the cell membrane, that's pretty much everything that surrounds the cell. It's a very, very thin membrane, and a good way to think about it, it's the doorkeeper. It determines what enters and what exits the cell. So it's pretty much the border around all of your animal cells. So what is being highlighted in red is your cell membrane. And it really covers all of the cell. And it's all around. So remember, our cell is kind of like it's an irregular shape, but most of the times it's circular, and your cell membrane is surrounding the complete cell. Now, the last component that we need to talk about is the cytoplasm. Now, the cytoplasm is pretty much all of the area in white. That is not a structure that we talked about, and it's a gel-like substance. And the key thing about the cytoplasm is it holds everything in place. Now, it does this with the help of something called the extracellular matrix, which is pretty much a fancy name for different anchors in the cell to help keep all of these organelles in place. But the cytoplasm, it's really important to help keep your nucleus in a particular spot, your mitochondria in a particular spot, your vacuoles in a particular spot, and your endoplasmic reticulum in a particular spot. So without your cytoplasm, you wouldn't really have a distinct structure for your cell. So this is basically the parts of the animal cell and what each part does. In the next video, what we're going to be looking at is a plant cell.